My name is Elise. I'm 28 years old. And tonight, I'm standing in the hallway of the house I grew up in, pretending I don't hear the sound of laughter coming from the dining room. They don't know I'm here yet. I was invited, technically, a formality. A text from my mother 3 days ago that read, "Come by Saturday if you're not busy. We're having dinner for Liam's promotion." No emoji, no warmth, just Liam's name, again, taking up space like it always has. The door creaks when I push it open. That familiar scent hits me. Roast chicken, candles that smell like furniture polish, and a sharp undercurrent of wine. I feel 12 again, but this time I'm wearing heels and carrying a leather portfolio case. I've come straight from work. I didn't have time to change, or maybe I didn't want to. My mother looks up from the head of the table when she sees me. She doesn't smile, just tilts her head like I'm a smudge on the edge of a photograph she thought she cropped out. "Elise, you made it." Liam glances at me, mouth full, then gives that lazy grin, the one that never reaches his eyes. He's always had that kind of charm, the kind that slithers, and somehow people love him for it. There are 5 people at the table: my parents, Liam, his girlfriend, and a man in a navy suit I don't recognise. The stranger raises his wine glass in my direction, polite but puzzled. I bet they didn't even mention I was invited. I sit in the only empty chair, the one closest to the kitchen door. Of course. The conversation barely skips a beat. My mother launches back into a story about how Liam landed his big new promotion at the startup downtown. I hear her use the word visionary. I watch the way her hand grazes his shoulder like he's a prince home from war. Nobody asks how I'm doing, not even the stranger. I cut a piece of dry chicken and listen. Let it wash over me. This used to bother me, how I disappeared in this house. But now it's almost useful. Because when they forget you're there, they say things they shouldn't. My father leans back in his chair. "Well, son, you've earned it. Everything we sacrificed, it's all paying off." He clinks his glass with Liam's. My mother smiles. "Remember when we emptied Elise's college fund?" She says, laughing. She was so upset. The table chuckles. Even Liam's girlfriend. I don't blink. I don't flinch. But something inside me folds. I was 17. I remember the letter from the university. Full scholarship. But it only covered tuition, housing, books, meals. That was supposed to come from the fund. Except it didn't exist anymore. They told me the market had collapsed, that investments went bad, that sometimes life is unfair. I found out the truth 2 years later. They liquidated it, every cent, to cover Liam's 3rd rehab, and they never told me. Not even when I dropped out and started working double shifts at the diner just to pay rent. My father passes me the wine bottle. I pour myself half a glass. "Elise," my mother says suddenly, "you still doing that waitress thing I swallow?" "No, I left the restaurant." "Oh, I own it now." The silence is sharp. I let it sit for one breath, then 2. Her brow tightens, trying to compute, but I say nothing more. I sip my wine and look at the ceiling like I've never noticed the cracks in the paint before. Liam mutters something under his breath. The stranger chuckles politely, then glances at me again, longer this time. After dessert, I excuse myself. I say I have work in the morning. Nobody stops me. Outside, the air is cold. I stand beside my car for a while, letting the wind hit my face. I look back at the house. That house. The one they used my name on when they got the mortgage. The one that still lists me as a co-owner on the title, thanks to a forgotten clause in my grandmother's will. They took my future to save Liam's past, but they forgot one thing. I've been building my own life. Quietly. Carefully. And I'm about to buy the house they think they own. I drove through the city with the windows down that night, not because it was warm. It wasn't. The chill cut through my coat, but I needed something sharp to keep me awake, to keep me from falling back into the numbness I'd perfected over the years. There's something about hearing your mother laugh about robbing you blind that peels back all the layers you've built. I didn't cry. I don't do that anymore. Not for them. Instead, I opened my glove compartment and pulled out the envelope I'd brought with me, the one they hadn't even noticed in my hand. Inside it was a signed pre-agreement. Offer letter, deposit slip, for their house. My house. It wasn't revenge. Not really. Not yet. It was survival. It was ownership. It was the last thing they thought I'd ever be capable of, and it was already in motion. I'd spent the last year preparing for this. Quietly. Invisibly. From the moment my grandmother's attorney called and told me she'd left something for me in a trust, a little used clause granting me partial rights to the house she helped them buy decades ago. She must have known. Maybe not everything, but enough. She saw me, in a way they never did. The trust didn't give me the house outright, but it gave me something better leverage, a legal foot in the door they'd always slammed in my face. And with it, I'd started to negotiate. First with the bank, then with the estate attorney they thought had long since retired. Piece by piece, I worked through the red tape, the liens, the quiet, unpaid debts my father thought he'd buried. And now, the house was for sale. They didn't even know it. Because that's what happens when you lie to everyone. Eventually, the paper trail starts to whisper behind your back. The next morning, I was back at my office. Yes, office. Not a restaurant table or a shift schedule. I run a hospitality consultancy now. Small, but solid. I started it 3 years ago with 2 friends from the service industry who were just as tired of being looked down on as I was. Now, we manage logistics and operations for 5 restaurant groups. I built it from the ashes of everything they thought I couldn't be. I had my assistant forward the property documents to our legal partner. I flagged one page in particular, the one that confirmed my mother had defaulted on her half of the property tax last year. She must have assumed my father handled it. He didn't. That lapse made the sale possible. I was quiet the whole day, focused, sharp, and when I got home that night, I poured a glass of wine and opened the old scrapbook I kept on the bottom shelf. Most of it was junk. Ticket stubs, notes from school, a photo or 2 of me and Liam as kids, before he learned how to lie with his eyes. Tucked in the back was a letter from my grandmother, handwritten, yellowed at the edges. Elise, if you're reading this, it means you found the strength I always knew was in you. Don't let the world decide your worth. You were never the mistake they whispered about. I stared at those words for a long time. You were never the mistake they whispered about. I remembered overhearing it once, late at night, when I was 16. My mother on the phone with her sister, whispering about how I was the accident and how everything changed after I was born. She was just never easy like Liam, never charming. I was too quiet, too intense, too much truth. And I learned, over time, to make myself small, palatable, useful, but I'm not shrinking anymore. The next day, I scheduled a meeting with the real estate broker handling the trust. We reviewed the terms, the taxes, the buyout. I signed what I needed to sign. And when the offer was formally submitted, it wasn't in my name. It was in the name of a holding company I set up last year. Discreet, professional, untraceable. They wouldn't see it coming. Not yet. Not until the final papers hit the table. And by then, it would be too late. The offer went through faster than I expected. Sometimes the universe doesn't fight you. It just steps back and watches. Within 10 days, I got the call from the broker. The seller, my father, technically had accepted the offer. No counter, no questions, just a tired sigh and a signature. He must have thought it was a miracle. A random buyer offering above market, no contingencies, all cash. He probably congratulated himself, thought the stars had finally aligned for him. I wonder if he poured himself a scotch to celebrate. I didn't celebrate. I sat at my kitchen table, phone still warm in my hand, and stared at the empty seat across from me. It's always empty. I keep it that way. It's easier to live alone when you've spent most of your life learning that even the people who are supposed to love you can't always be trusted with your softest parts. When the paperwork was finalised, I didn't go to the house right away. I waited. I let it breathe. I imagined them living in it like nothing had changed, sitting on the same couch, watching reruns, ignoring each other the way they always had when there wasn't an audience. And then the letter arrived. Not from me, from the property manager I'd hired. A formal notice the home had been sold. The new owner would be taking possession within 30 days. They had 1 month to leave. No exceptions. I was sitting at my desk when my mother called. I let it ring. Then again. Then 5 more times over the next 2 hours. Each time, she left a voicemail. The tone changed slightly each time. First confusion, then disbelief, then panic. By the 6th call, it turned to anger. "Is this your doing? Elise? Is this some kind of sick joke?" Her voice cracked halfway through, and for a moment, I felt it. That old urge to apologise, to explain, to smooth things over, but I didn't pick up, because that voice wasn't asking for the truth. It was demanding control, the kind she'd always held like a noose around my neck. Instead, I saved the messages. Every last one. Later that evening, Liam called too. His number still pops up with a dumb nickname in my contacts from 10 years ago. Golden Boy. I never changed it. He didn't leave a message, just hung up after 2 rings. I pictured him pacing the kitchen, phone to his ear, realising, maybe for the first time in his life, that I held something he didn't. I didn't enjoy it. Not the way some people might, but I won't lie and say it didn't bring me peace. The next morning, I stopped by the house. For the first time since dinner, I didn't tell anyone I was coming. I parked across the street and watched for a while. The lawn hadn't been cut. The curtains were still drawn the way my mother liked them, barely open, like they were afraid too much sunlight might show the cracks. I walked up the front steps. My key, the one I'd never returned, slid easily into the lock. The house smelled the same, pine cleaner, and silence. They weren't home. I stood in the foyer, looking around at the same walls that had witnessed every quiet humiliation I'd swallowed over the years. The place where I'd been told I was selfish for wanting to leave. The hallway where I stood crying at 17 after the college counsellor told me my financial aid had fallen through. The same house where, year after year, Liam got graduation parties, job celebrations, birthday barbecues, and I got nothing. Nothing but silence and maybe next year's. I walked into the living room, touched the edge of the mantel, ran my hand along the top of the framed photo that had sat there for decades, my brother's football portrait. Mine had never made it to the wall. Not once. I took it down. Not to break it. Not to burn it. Just to make space. I placed it face down on the coffee table. Then I walked upstairs, past the room that used to be mine, still pink, still small, and into the master bedroom. The bed was unmade. The closet was open. I saw my mother's perfume bottles lined up like soldiers on the dresser, my father's ties coiled like snakes in their wooden box. This was their kingdom, but it was mine now. I left a letter on the nightstand, just one page, typed, clean. It read, "You took my future without asking. Now I've taken back my past. You have 27 days left. Use them however you like. Elise." Then I walked out the door. And for the first time in my life, I didn't look back. 3 days later, my father showed up at my office. He didn't call ahead, didn't text. Just walked through the glass door like he belonged there, like he still believed he had some power over me. He wore his old wool coat, the one with the fraying collar, and clutched a manila folder in his hand like a weapon. I stood up slowly, nodding to my assistant not to interfere. "Elise," he said, like the word tasted strange in his mouth. "We need to talk." I gestured for him to sit, but I didn't. I stayed standing. He looked small in the sleek chair across from me. His eyes scanned the room, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the minimalist decor, the neat stack of client portfolios on my desk. His gaze settled on the plaque near my monitor. Elise Morgan, founder and managing partner. "You didn't tell us," he said after a moment, "that you'd grown into all this." "No," I replied, calm. "I didn't." He cleared his throat. "Your mother is upset." I raised an eyebrow. "And Liam?" He paused. "He's confused. He says you're doing this to punish us." I leaned forward, resting my hands on the desk. "Is that what you think this is?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he opened the manila folder and slid a few papers across to me. I didn't touch them. "Look," he said, "I know we made mistakes. We were trying to keep the family afloat. By cutting me loose," I said flatly. "You were strong. We thought you'd land on your feet." I nodded slowly, then turned the papers around with one finger. They were plea letters, badly written ones, asking for an extension on the move-out date. Something about Liam's work, about their retirement plans, about not having anywhere else to go. "Do you remember what you told me when I asked why my college money was gone?" I asked. Voice quiet. He looked away. "Elise, that was a long time ago. You said sometimes we have to make sacrifices for the people we love." I continued, "But it was always me sacrificing. Not once did Liam go without. Not once did you ask him to give up something so I could have a shot." My father's jaw clenched. He was struggling. He needed help. So did I. I whispered, "You just didn't notice." He looked older than I remembered. His shoulders slumped, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to gather himself. But I didn't feel sorry for him. Not now. I'd spent too many years doing that, and it never changed anything. "I'll give you 60 days, I said finally. "You can use that time to find somewhere else. After that, the locks change." His head snapped up. "You don't have to do this." "No," I said, "I don't." "But I am." He stood up, folder in hand, but didn't move toward the door. "What happened to you?" he asked softly. That question hung between us like fog. I stared at him, steady. "You did," I said. He nodded once, eyes flickering with something I couldn't name, then left. When the door closed behind him, I let out a breath I hadn't realised I'd been holding. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. I could see the river from here. The skyline stretched like an open map, all the places I'd built myself back together, and somewhere below, my past was unravelling. Later that night, I got a text from Liam. What the hell? Elise, you think this makes you better than us? I stared at it for a long time. My finger hovered over the keyboard, ready to respond, but I didn't, because that's what he wanted. A reaction. A spark of the old me. The one who would fold under guilt. The one who would try to explain herself, justify her worth. Instead, I blocked the number, let him yell into silence. A week passed, then 2. The lawyer called to confirm the transfer was complete. I was now the sole owner. The deed had been refiled, the utilities rerouted, the property tax paid in full, and the security system installed. I drove to the house again, this time in daylight. When I pulled into the driveway, my mother was outside clipping the hedges. She froze when she saw me. Elise, she said stiffly, wiping her hands on her apron. We weren't expecting you. This is my house, I said simply. She bristled. You really think this makes you powerful? I tilted my head. No, it makes me free. Her lips curled slightly. We gave you everything. No, I said. You gave Liam everything. You gave me expectations. You gave me shame. Her hand tightened around the hedge clippers. But she said nothing. I looked around one last time. The porch swing, the mailbox, the crack in the front step. All the ghosts that lived here. I'll send movers next week. I said, I suggest you start packing. Then I turned and left her standing there, eyes wide, mouth tight, still believing the world owed her a softness she never extended to me. I didn't visit again for 2 weeks. I wanted to. Some part of me wanted to drive by every day just to see if the curtains were open, if the porch lights were still on, if they were pretending like nothing had changed. But I didn't. I gave them space, not out of mercy, but because I knew that silence was more haunting than confrontation. The movers were scheduled. I sent them the date in writing. No response. Not from my father. Not from my mother. Liam didn't text again either. It was strange. The silence. I'd spent so much of my life wrapped in their noise, their demands, their judgments, their disappointed sighs and maybe next times. Now, with the tables turned, they had nothing to say. The night before the movers came, I got a letter in the mail. An actual letter, handwritten, on ivory stationery I recognised from my mother's desk drawer. It wasn't an apology. Not really. It was an elegy for what she thought she'd lost. I don't know what kind of woman you've become, Elise, but this house was never meant to hurt you. We did what we thought was best for the family. I'm sorry if that wasn't enough for you. That line, if that wasn't enough for you, it wasn't. It never was. And that wasn't my failure. It was theirs. I didn't write back. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I packed a bag and checked into a cabin 2 hours outside the city. No phone reception, no Wi-Fi, just a fireplace, a notebook, and a quiet I had never known growing up. I let it all wash over me. The anger, the exhaustion, the small, lingering guilt that clung to the edges like mould. I wrote pages I would never send, letters to my childhood self, to the girl who wore Liam's old hand-me-downs while he got new ones, to the girl who learned to say thank you for being ignored, to the teenager who smiled through every heartbreak and said, "It's fine," when it never was. I let them speak, and I answered back. On the last night, I walked into the woods behind the cabin and burned the letters in a tin bucket. I watched the flames lick the edges of every sentence, watched the smoke carry it all up and out of me. No drama, no ritual, just release. When I returned to the city, the house was empty. The movers had come and gone. My property manager had handled everything. The keys were in my mailbox. The security code had been reset. It was mine now, completely. But still, I didn't go inside right away. I stood on the porch for a long time, staring at the door. I thought about every fight in that hallway, every slammed door. Every night I lay awake listening to Liam stumble in drunk, while my parents whispered about how boys will be boys. I thought about the day I left for college with a duffel bag and a smile I didn't mean, pretending I wasn't afraid, and how 3 months later I dropped out because rent was more urgent than books and ramen was cheaper than dignity. I'd buried all of that neatly, but the body always remembers. Eventually, I opened the door. The house was still empty, but not clean. There were scuff marks on the floor, a lingering scent of my mother's cooking oil in the kitchen, and a single chair left in the living room like someone had sat there one last time, unsure of whether to let go. I walked from room to room, not inspecting, just remembering. The upstairs bedroom, mine, was exactly as I left it. The same floral curtains. The dent in the wall from when I'd thrown my phone after my first breakup. The journal tucked in the closet behind a shoebox of high school memorabilia. I didn't open it. Not yet. I walked into the master bedroom. Empty now. Just a few dust outlines where furniture used to be. A couple of wire hangers still swinging in the closet. But the light coming in through the window was beautiful. For the first time, it felt like a room without ghosts. That night, I slept there. No furniture. Just me and a sleeping bag on the floor, staring at the ceiling I'd grown up under. Only now, it belonged to me. I didn't cry, but I did smile, softly, at the silence, because it wasn't hollow anymore. It was full of me. The next morning, I woke to light spilling through the window like it had been waiting for me. No alarm, no noise, just the sound of birds outside and the hum of stillness inside. A kind of peace I didn't realize I'd been chasing for years. I stretched slowly, my back aching from the hardwood floor. But it didn't matter. I was here, alone, in the house that once made me feel invisible. I showered in the same bathroom where my mother used to knock impatiently if I took more than 10 minutes. I made coffee in the kitchen where I once got scolded for using the good mugs. Now, I drank from one with chipped porcelain and smiled at the irony. The house wasn't a home yet. It still felt like a shell, but it was my shell now. I spent that weekend doing something I never thought I'd want to cleaning, not out of obligation, but out of ownership. I wiped the baseboards. I scrubbed the sinks. I took down the dusty curtains that had dulled the light for too long. It felt almost holy, like shedding the skin of someone else's history, slowly making room for my own. Every drawer held remnants of them old receipts, dried pens, faded takeout menus. I tossed them, one by one. Each sound of paper hitting the trash was like a breath leaving me. In the garage, I found boxes of things I hadn't seen in over a decade. Stuff they'd promised had been lost in the move or donated by mistake. But here it all was. my childhood sketchbooks, my acceptance letter to the art school I never attended, a birthday card from my grandmother, unopened. I sat down on the cold garage floor, my fingers trembling as I opened the envelope. Elise, I know they don't see you, but I do. Never let their blindness become your belief. I love you. Grandma. The ink was faded, but her words still burned like fresh fire. I didn't cry, even then. I just closed the card and held it against my chest, letting myself feel the weight of everything she tried to shield me from. That night, I ordered pizza, sat on the living room floor with a paper plate and watched an old movie on my laptop, just like I used to when I lived in a studio apartment and thought the world had passed me by. And then the phone rang. Not my cell, the landline. I'd forgotten it even existed. My mother must have left it connected out of habit. I let it ring once, twice. Then I picked up. Elise Liam's voice, tired, raspy, too soft to be the Liam I remembered, but too familiar to be anyone else. I didn't say anything. I know you're there, still. I waited. I need you to know I didn't ask them to do it. The college fund, I didn't even know until after, and I was messed up back then. I was in a bad place. Silence. I'm not saying that to get sympathy. I'm trying. I've been clean for over a year now. I've got a job, not fancy, but steady. Still, I said nothing. I guess I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, even if it doesn't fix anything. There was a pause. I never thought you'd be the one to make it out. I closed my eyes. I used to think you'd always be behind me. And now, he trailed off. The line buzzed gently. Anyway, I'm staying at Kelly's now. She said hi. And, congrats, I guess. You earned it. Click. The line went dead. I didn't move. Not for a long time. Eventually, I hung up, turned off the lights, crawled back into my sleeping bag. Liam's voice echoed in my head, not because it held power, but because it didn't. Because, for once, it wasn't louder than mine. I didn't hear from them again after that call. Not for weeks. Not a letter. Not a voicemail. Not even a petty social media post. And honestly, that silence felt like a clean wound. Still healing, but not infected anymore. I got used to the quiet. The kind of quiet you earn, not stumble into. The kind that follows chaos like a curtain falling on a bad play. I spent those weeks rebuilding the house, not just with paint and furniture, but with intent. Every room, every choice became a soft rebellion. I repainted the kitchen a soft, warm green. It used to be a sterile beige, like it was afraid to feel like anything. I filled it with plants, hung open shelves, bought mugs that made me smile. I even installed a radio by the sink, one of those retro ones that plays jazz in the early mornings. In the living room, I put in floor cushions and a big velvet couch in a deep rust colour. Something my mother would have called tacky. Something I called joy. The master bedroom, I didn't keep it. Instead, I turned it into a home studio, a place for me to create, write, sketch, think. I put a massive corkboard on one wall and pinned up everything I'd been too afraid to commit to before. Business ideas, travel plans, poetry scraps, dreams, and my old bedroom, I left it untouched. Not out of fear, but as a reminder of who I was, of what I survived. It became a museum of the girl they tried to erase. One night, I sat in that room with a glass of wine and my old journal cracked open on my knees. The pages were filled with angry loops and tear-stained corners. There was one entry, one I'd written when I was 19, that stopped me cold. Maybe I wasn't meant to be wanted. Maybe that's why I fade in rooms. Why people forget I'm there until they need something. I don't want to be invisible. I just don't know how to be anything else. I touched the words like they were someone else's, like I was comforting a stranger. And in a way, I was, because that version of me no longer existed. I'd buried her gently, with love. I started having people over. Not often. I still like my solitude too much for that. But enough to hear laughter echo off the walls without flinching. Friends from work, clients I trusted, even my neighbour, Marie, a widow in her 60s who brought fresh scones and told stories about her late husband like they were fairy tales. She said the house felt lighter now, brighter. I nodded, not needing to explain why. One Saturday morning, I took a long walk around the neighbourhood, the same sidewalks I'd once dragged my feet down as a teenager, convinced the world was just a locked gate and I didn't have the key. Now, they felt like mine. The barista at the corner cafe knew my name. The florist waved when I passed. Even the old man with the grumpy beagle nodded at me like I belonged. Because I did. I was no longer the forgotten daughter. I was Elise Morgan, woman, builder, owner. One night, Marie invited me to her backyard for a small dinner. Nothing fancy. Just candles, mismatched dishes, and warm pasta that tasted like it was made with love. Halfway through, she asked, gently, "Do your parents know you're happy?" I smiled at her. I don't think they'd recognise happiness if it sat across from them. She nodded slowly, knowingly. They might come around, she said. They might, I replied, but I won't wait for them. We toasted to that, to letting go of people who only knew how to hold you down. When I walked back home that night, I stood in front of the house for a long moment, watching the lights flicker inside, the ivy climbing up the porch rail, the little welcome mat I'd chosen myself. This wasn't a victory, not exactly. It was a reclamation of space, of voice, of worth. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't living in someone else's version of who I was supposed to be. I was just home. It was a Wednesday when the letter arrived. Thick envelope, no return address. My name written in looping, familiar script, the kind only one person in my life had ever used with that specific pressure on the downstrokes. My mother. I stood in the foyer staring at it for a full minute, the scent of morning coffee still hanging in the air beside me. I thought about tossing it, just dropping it into the recycling bin without reading a word, but I didn't. I slid my finger under the seal and opened it slowly, like peeling back a wound that hadn't fully healed. Inside was a single handwritten page. No, dear Elise, no apology. Just her words, layered, defensive, and strangely raw. I know you think we never loved you, that we only saw Liam, but we were scared. Elise, you were too smart, too quiet, too stubborn. You didn't need us the way he did, so we gave him more. Maybe too much, but you always seemed like you'd be fine. I read it twice. She still didn't see it. Didn't understand that seeming fine isn't the same as being okay. That, being strong because you have to be, isn't the same as being safe. She went on, I'm not asking for forgiveness, but I do wonder if you think any of this made you better. Owning the house. Making us leave. Did it make you feel powerful? I folded the letter in half and sat down on the bench by the door. Power. That word. She said it like it was poison, like claiming my own space, the very space they denied me, was a cruelty instead of a correction. No. It didn't make me feel powerful. It made me feel real. It made me feel like I could breathe. I tucked the letter back into the envelope and slid it into the drawer beside my keys. Not because I needed to keep it, but because I wanted to remember that even now, she still couldn't say the thing that mattered. I was wrong. I'm sorry. Not even once. A few days later, I drove past the small apartment complex where my parents had moved. I didn't go in. Just sat across the street in my car and watched as my father carried groceries up the steps. He looked older, slower. For a moment, I felt that old pang again, the one that used to trick me into softening, into minimizing what had been done. But it didn't last, because I knew something now that I hadn't known. Then empathy doesn't mean letting people keep hurting you. Forgiveness can live in silence. That same week, Liam texted again. Just wanted to let you know I started night classes. Not trying to be dramatic, but you kind of made me rethink a lot. I stared at the message for a long while. This time, I responded, I hope you finish them. For you. He didn't reply, but he didn't have to. That night, I pulled out a photo album I hadn't touched in years. It was buried in the back of the hall closet, wedged behind a box of old scarves and unopened Christmas cards. Inside were pictures of me and Liam as kids, Halloween costumes, family beach trips. One photo, I must have been 5, showed me holding his hand at the edge of a pool, terrified to jump. I looked braver than I felt in the picture. That was always the case. I slipped it out of the sleeve and pinned it on the corkboard in my studio, right in the centre. Not because I missed who we were, but because I wanted to honour who I've become. The house feels different now. The walls echo laughter instead of silence. I host dinners, game nights, book clubs. Once, I invited a friend to stay for a week while she went through a divorce. She cried in the kitchen one night, apologising for taking up space. I touched her shoulder and said, "This place was built for people who need space." I meant it. Every time I walk through the front door, I remember the girl who once stood here, waiting to be chosen, waiting to be noticed. Now, she walks beside me. She's not waiting anymore. She owns the keys. Autumn came quietly that year. The trees around the neighbourhood shifted slowly, almost shyly, into gold and rust and blood orange. I found myself pausing more often, on the porch, at the kitchen window, along the back garden path, just to watch the leaves fall in slow spirals. There was a time when I would have missed it, when my days blurred together in a haze of work and worry and trying to stay afloat. But now, I noticed everything, like how the wind changed direction in the late afternoons, or how the light through the maple tree made soft, moving shadows on the floorboards of the living room. It wasn't magic. It was presence. I started making small changes outside the house. 2. I hired a landscaper, a woman named Tasha, who used to do maintenance for one of my old clients. She was tough and quiet, with dirt under her nails and an eye for beauty most people miss. Together, we tore up the dying hedges my mother had once trimmed with militaristic precision and planted wildflowers instead. We added lavender, rosemary, snapdragons, and a tiny apple tree. It'll take a few years to fruit. Tasha warned. I can wait, I said, because that was the difference now. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was building. One morning, while I was pruning the new rose bushes along the front fence, I saw her, my mother. She was standing across the street, half hidden behind the parked cars, wearing that same trench coat she always wore in fall. Her arms were crossed. She didn't move, just watched. I didn't wave, didn't flinch, just stood there, shears in hand, until she turned and walked away. It wasn't confrontation. It wasn't closure. But it was enough. She saw the garden. She saw the roses. And she saw that I was still standing. That weekend, I hosted a dinner for my team. The people who'd helped me grow my business from a dream whispered over midnight drinks to something real, tangible, sustainable. We cooked together, music playing, candles lit, laughter echoing off the freshly painted walls. Someone spilled wine on the new couch. Someone else knocked over a vase. It didn't matter. The house could hold it. I could hold it. I watched them from the doorway for a moment, unnoticed. Their joy, their chaos, their comfort in this space. And I realised something I hadn't before. This house wasn't just a place I took back. It was a place I transformed. It had become a haven, not just for me, but for others. A soft landing, a warm table, a second chance. Later that night, after everyone had left, I curled up under a knit blanket on the porch and opened my journal. The same one I'd started years ago in a too-small apartment, with broken blinds and no heat. I flipped to a fresh page and wrote, "They took my foundation, but they didn't take my fire. I built myself a home from the ashes, and now I carry warmth, not for them, but for me, for those who need it." I closed the journal and looked out at the garden, the porch light casting soft halos over the roses. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger had its place. It had gotten me through the hardest parts, but it didn't belong here, not in this new chapter. Peace had taken root, slowly, quietly, with every choice I made to love myself more than I feared their absence. In the silence of that porch, with the cool air brushing my face and the scent of lavender rising from the garden, I whispered to no one in particular. I made it, and, for once, I believed it. It was nearly winter when I got the message. A plain, white envelope slipped under my door. No stamp, no name, just one sheet of paper folded in half, almost too neatly. Inside, in tight, masculine handwriting, were 6 words. "Do you have room for me? I didn't need to ask who it was. Liam." I stared at the paper for a long time. The kind of long that lets memory crawl up from the depths, all the versions of him, layered and conflicting. The bright-eyed boy who used to protect me on the playground. The teenager who drove drunk and crashed our mother's car. The man who stood silent while they erased me one sacrifice at a time. And now, this. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't a manipulation. It was a question. It was vulnerability, offered plainly. But I didn't answer right away. Instead, I made tea. Sat on the back steps of the garden where the rosemary had begun to frost at the edges. I watched a squirrel dart across the fence, trailing a ribbon of dead leaves. I thought about everything I owed and everything I didn't, because this wasn't about owing anymore. It was about choice. I chose peace. But peace didn't mean isolation. So the next day, I wrote back. 1 line. No explanation. "Only if you're ready to help me repaint the upstairs bathroom." He showed up 2 days later with a half-empty toolbox and a gallon of the wrong colour paint. We didn't talk much that first afternoon. Just worked, taped off trim, sanded the baseboards. I gave him a pair of gloves and a cup of coffee and turned on an old jazz playlist. And somehow, it worked. The silence between us wasn't cold. It was careful. A conversation in slow motion. When the light outside started to dim, he finally spoke. "Mum says you've changed." I wiped a smear of blue-grey from my wrist. She never really knew me. He nodded. She thinks you're trying to erase everything. I'm not. I said, I'm just building something that didn't include me the first time. He didn't argue, didn't defend her. That felt new. We ordered takeout that night, ate on the living room floor, just like we used to when we were kids and the power went out. Except this time, there was no storm, no fear, just two adults trying to fill in the cracks of what was left. He told me about night school, about his sponsor, about how Kelly had left, and it hurt less than he expected. I think I loved who I wanted her to be. He said, not who she was. I nodded. I knew that feeling intimately. He slept on the couch, left early in the morning, but before he did, he placed the empty paint can by the door and said, I'll come back next week. We can do the trim. I said, okay. He did come back. Not every day, not even every week, but enough. We painted the hallway, refinished the banister, repaired the creaky stair that had groaned every night since we were kids, and slowly, without ceremony, a new version of us began to take shape, not best friends, not siblings as the world imagined, but survivors of the same fire. One afternoon, as we painted the front door a deep, warm red, he said something I didn't expect. Did you know Grandma left a letter for me? 2, I looked up, surprised. No. He nodded. She said I had to protect you. Said I'd forget how strong you were if I wasn't careful. I swallowed. He didn't look at me, just kept painting. I wasn't careful. I didn't reply. Because sometimes, silence is the only way to let someone own what they've said. After he left that night, I found myself walking through the house alone, touching the newly painted walls, running my fingers along the doorframe, breathing in the smell of wood and lavender and change. It felt like something sacred had cracked open. Not forgiveness, but recognition. And maybe that was enough. The first snow fell quietly. I woke up to the world covered in white, the rooftop softened, the garden hushed, the sky hanging low like it didn't want to disturb anything. It felt right, like the earth itself had decided to blanket everything we'd been through. Not to hide it, just to give it rest. I pulled on my boots and stepped out onto the porch, the wood creaking beneath me. The air was sharp and clean. I stood there for a long time, watching the way the snow sat gently on the rosemary and wildflowers that hadn't quite died yet. They were still holding on. Like me. Inside. The house was warm. I'd learned how to care for it, how to bleed the radiators, how to reset the breaker when the power flickered, how to coax the old pipes to cooperate on cold mornings. Funny, the things no one teaches you until you're alone with them. Liam showed up later that afternoon, tracking snow through the foyer, cheeks red from the cold. Brought something, he said, holding up a crookedly wrapped package. Don't get excited. I wrapped it myself. I raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He dropped the bundle on the kitchen table, brushing off his coat. Inside, the paper was a framed photo. Of us. From when we were kids. I couldn't have been more than 7. Maybe 8. I was wearing a crooked birthday crown. Frosting on my cheek. Liam was behind me, holding up bunny ears with a grin so wide it hurt. I stared at it for a long time. Where'd you find this? I asked. Kelly found it in a box I never unpacked. Figured you should have it. I nodded slowly. Ran my fingers along the edge of the frame. Thank you. He shrugged. You were always the one who remembered things. We didn't talk much after that. Just sat in the living room while snow thickened outside the windows. I made tea. He fell asleep on the couch, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't mind the quiet that settled between us. It wasn't filled with guilt or resentment anymore, just quiet. That night, after he left, I stood in the hallway with the picture in my hands. I didn't hang it right away, just held it against my chest, letting the past feel less sharp. I walked upstairs, stopping at the door to my childhood room. I hadn't touched it since I moved back in. Not really. But something pulled me now. Inside. The wallpaper still peeled at the corners. The bookshelf still bowed under the weight of old paperbacks and sketch pads. The bed was smaller than I remembered, barely wide enough for a girl to stretch out in, let alone grow. I sat on the edge and looked around. At everything I'd once wanted to escape, it didn't feel like a cage anymore. It felt like a monument to all the versions of me that had made it this far. I took the photo and set it on the nightstand. A reminder, not of the pain, but of the persistence. The next morning, I made breakfast. Real breakfast. Not just coffee and toast, pancakes, scrambled eggs, orange juice in the good glasses. I opened the windows just enough to let in the smell of snow and pine, lit a candle, played Billie Holiday on the kitchen speaker. I set the table for one, and I ate slowly. Not because I had nowhere to be, but because I had finally become someone I wanted to spend time with. The woman who sat at that table wasn't broken. She wasn't angry. She wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. She was whole, quietly, firmly, fully, and as the light spilled across the table and the warmth of the kitchen settled into my skin, I whispered, just once, just for me, I'm proud of you. And I meant it. Winter deepened. The snow stayed. And with it came a stillness that felt earned. It was the kind of winter that wrapped around the bones of the house, not just outside, but within, muffling sounds, slowing time, the kind that used to make me feel trapped as a child. But this year, I didn't feel trapped. I felt anchored. I'd always thought healing would feel like fireworks, some grand crescendo of closure, but instead, it arrived slowly, quietly, like the way snow fills a footprint, gently, without erasing what came before, just softening it. One evening, I was going through old boxes in the attic when I found it, the journal my grandmother kept, not the one she left me, another one, hidden inside a shoebox labelled Tax Receipts, 1989. Of course, she would hide something personal inside something no one wanted to look at. The pages were worn, the handwriting slanted and familiar. I sat cross-legged in the attic, breath clouding in front of me, and began to read. There were pages about her garden, her morning walks, the way my grandfather used to hum while making coffee. But there were also entries about me. Elise reminds me of myself, too observant for her own good. They think she's distant, but she's just watching, just waiting to be invited in. I pray someone sees her before it's too late. I closed the journal and pressed it to my chest. Someone had seen me, even if it wasn't my mother, even if it wasn't Liam, even if it had only been one person, one woman planting the seed of belief when I was too small to know how to water it. It was enough. Later that night, I sat by the fire with the journal and a cup of tea and wrote her a letter, even though she was gone. I found your words. I'm okay now. Thank you for holding the part of me no one else could see. I see her now too, and I won't let her go. I folded the letter, tucked it into the journal, and placed both on the highest shelf in the studio, the one with the books that changed me. The next morning, I got a knock at the door. Not Liam, not my parents. A woman in her late 20s, holding a folder and a cautious smile. She introduced herself as Marla, a social worker with the city. She'd heard about my space through a mutual friend. Someone said you might have a room. She said, for a transitional housing project. We're helping women out of shelters. Just short-term stays. I didn't hesitate. Yes. I said, come in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table that once felt too big for just me, and talked for over an hour. By the time she left, we had a plan. Within a month, the upstairs bedroom, the one I had left untouched for so long, was cleaned, painted, and transformed into a sanctuary. The first guest was a young woman named Ava, 22, soft-spoken, eyes full of distance. She stayed for 6 weeks. We didn't talk much. I gave her space. A door that locked, a bookshelf, a basket of tea and a set of clean towels. She left a note when she moved out. I didn't think people like you existed. Thank you for letting me breathe. I sat with her words a long time. And then I realised I had become the woman I used to need. Not by force, but by choosing, again and again, to not become the people who hurt me. More women came. Some stayed for days, and some for months. Each left something behind. A note, a scarf, a recipe on the fridge, and the house. It filled with life, with music, with memory. And still, I had space, because I'd built it that way. One morning, I found a photograph taped to my door. A candid shot someone had taken during a small dinner the week before. Me laughing, wine in hand, head tilted back. I almost didn't recognise myself. Not because I looked different, but because I looked free. Spring came early that year. The snow melted in a rush, streams of water trickling along the edges of the sidewalk like veins returning to a thawing body. Buds formed on the apple tree we planted. I'd almost forgotten it was there, so small in winter, bare and unpromising. But now, it stood proud and green, reaching for something invisible. Much like I had, the air smelled different. Damp soil, new grass, the faint sweetness of change. I found myself waking earlier, not from anxiety, but from anticipation. There was a new girl staying in the upstairs room. Her name was Tia, 24, sharp-witted, quiet in crowds but fearless one-on-one. She'd been through more than anyone should at that age, but her spine was steel. One morning, she joined me in the garden. No words at first. Just the two of us on our knees in the soil, planting bulbs along the back fence. After a while, she asked, "Did this house always feel like this?" I looked up. Like, what? She brushed dirt off her palms. Safe. Like it belongs to women. I didn't answer right away. Just smiled faintly. It didn't. I said, "But it does now." She nodded, like she understood. And I think she did. That week, Liam came by again, toolbox in hand. As usual, we were working on installing a second bathroom upstairs. Something functional, something kind, privacy, dignity. The kind of thing I never thought to expect growing up in a house where your needs were always too loud. As we worked, he paused to ask something unexpected. "Do you think Mum will ever come around?" I didn't look up from the tile I was placing. "I don't know." I said, "But I'm not waiting." He nodded, like he already knew the answer. Later, he handed me a flash drive. I cleaned out the basement at their apartment. He said, "Found this. It's weird stuff. Old records, backups. Thought maybe you'd want to look." I didn't open it right away. I let it sit on my desk for 2 days. Something about it felt heavy. When I finally plugged it into my laptop, I found a folder labelled simply, "For Elise." My heart tightened. Inside were scans of old report cards, drawings I'd done in elementary school, a copy of my university acceptance letter, the one I never got to use. At the very bottom, a letter, typed, dated 2 years ago. Elise. I've never been able to say these things aloud, but maybe writing them will help. You were never invisible. You were just too bright. And I was ashamed I didn't know how to raise a daughter who needed more than I could give. I don't expect forgiveness. I only hope you found somewhere to feel whole. Mum, I didn't cry. I read it again, slower this time, and then I closed the laptop. The next day, I printed the letter and placed it in an envelope. I drove across town to the tiny apartment complex where my parents lived. I didn't knock. I slipped the envelope under their door. Nothing else. No note, no message, just their own words. Returned to them, not for vengeance, for honesty. That was all I ever wanted. As I drove back home, windows down, hair dancing in the wind, I thought about how far I'd come, not just in distance, in direction. I wasn't circling pain anymore. I was walking away from it. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw Tia and 2 other girls from the transitional program sitting on the porch, laughing, sharing tea. Their shoes were kicked off, their shoulders relaxed. They looked like they belonged. I stood for a moment before getting out of the car, just watching. The house glowing behind them like it had become what it was always meant to be, not a monument to pain, but a living proof of what happens when women reclaim their space. I stepped onto the porch, and Tia looked up. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah," I said, "I'm home." Summer settled in like a slow exhale. The kind of summer where the days stretch long and golden, and the evenings hum with crickets and laughter through open windows. The house breathed with the season. Fuller now, warmer in ways that went beyond temperature. We planted sunflowers in the front yard. They grew taller than expected, tipping toward the sky like they couldn't help themselves. Tia said they reminded her of second chances. By then, we had hosted 6 women, each with a different story, each leaving behind something quiet but permanent, a recipe, a painted rock in the garden, a note under the cushion of the couch. They came and went like chapters, not erased, not mourned, just complete. One morning, I woke to a knock at the door. It wasn't Liam, not a delivery, not one of the women upstairs. It was my mother. She stood on the porch in linen slacks, hair swept back, holding a brown paper bag like it might protect her. She looked smaller than I remembered, thinner, less certain. I didn't invite her in. I stepped outside, closed the door behind me, and waited. "I was in the neighbourhood," she said. I raised an eyebrow. "You were 2 cities over." She nodded, caught, but didn't flinch. "I brought lemon bars," she added, lifting the bag like a peace offering. "Your grandmother's recipe. I didn't take them." She sighed. "I don't know how to do this." "Elise," I noticed. A long silence. "I read your letter," she said. "The one you gave back to us. I didn't think you'd ever acknowledge it. You said what you needed to say. So did I." She looked down at her shoes. "I wasn't good at being a mother." I said nothing. I thought loving Liam loudly would cover up what I couldn't give you quietly. I crossed my arms. "You didn't just forget me. You erased me." Her mouth tightened, not defensively, but like she'd been expecting those words. and they still hurt. I know. Another long pause. I don't expect forgiveness, she said. Good, I replied, because I'm not offering it. Not like that. She met my eyes. Something fragile there. Then why come to the door? Because I'm not angry anymore, I said softly. But I needed you to know that doesn't mean I want you back. Her shoulders dropped, just slightly. The breath of someone who had hoped, and now understood. And the house, she asked, does it still feel like home? I smiled. It finally does. She nodded. You did something beautiful with it. I did something honest with it. We stood there, the morning sun stretching over the porch, a breeze passing between us like a messenger without words. She held out the bag again. This time, I took it. Not because I wanted lemon bars, but because it didn't cost me anything anymore to carry the weight of her offering. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. She turned and walked down the steps, her sandals tapping softly against the wood, and I didn't watch her go. I stepped back inside, shut the door, and set the bag on the counter. Later, Tia would find it and ask, "These from your mum?" I'd nod. "They are." She'd bite into one and shrug. "Could use more sugar." And I'd laugh, because they could. The days went on. We hosted more women. I expanded the second floor, converted the attic into a reading room, turned the basement into an art space. Liam helped. Quietly. No fanfare. Just presence. One night, after a long day of sanding floorboards, he sat beside me on the back steps and said, "You know, I used to think you were cold." I didn't turn to him. "I know. But you weren't," he added. "You were just protecting what little you had left." I nodded. "Still am." He smiled. "Yeah. But now you've got more to protect." I looked out at the garden, at the porch lights glowing behind us, at the windows filled with new lives. "I know," I said, the day the apple tree bloomed. I stood barefoot in the grass, holding a mug of tea, and let the silence hold me. It wasn't the silence I grew up with, the kind that buzzed with tension, with unsaid things, with the weight of being overlooked. No. This silence was earned. It was the hush after the storm, the breath before a new sentence begins. I reached out and touched one of the blossoms, soft, white, impossibly fragile, and felt something loosen in me, like a knot that had lived in my chest since I was too young to name it, finally gave way. I had spent so many years waiting for something, for recognition, for apology, for someone to choose me. And then, quietly, steadily, I had learned to choose myself. I walked through the house barefoot, trailing warmth behind me. The walls were covered now in framed photos, none of them posed. Candid moments, women smiling, laughing, painting, building, pieces of joy caught mid-air. The upstairs room was occupied by a woman named Marisol, 31, escaping something she hadn't yet put into words. She spent her mornings drawing and her nights sitting under the stars, with a blanket around her shoulders and a thermos of chamomile tea. She didn't talk much, but she always looked people in the eye. There was strength in that. I passed her in the hallway and we exchanged quiet nods, like a secret handshake between survivors. No need for backstory, just respect. Downstairs, the front door opened and Liam stepped in with a toolbox and a lopsided smile. Basement lights flickering again. He said, "I know," I replied. "It's haunted. I'm letting it stay." He laughed, the real kind. No bite, no defensiveness. Just sound. He fixed the light anyway. We didn't say much after that. We didn't need to. He left before sunset, and I lingered in the front yard, pulling weeds from around the base of the sunflowers. A neighbour passed by and waved. I waved back. I didn't know her name yet, but that didn't matter. Community doesn't start with names. It starts with presence. That night, I cooked for myself. A full meal. No frozen shortcuts. Real food. Set the table. Poured a glass of wine. Lit a candle. I sat in the chair I used to avoid, the one at the head of the table, and looked around at the house I had reclaimed. It wasn't grand. It wasn't perfect. But it was mine. And not just legally. Not just technically. It was mine because it now reflected who I had become, not the girl they had overlooked, but the woman who had outgrown their silence. The doorbell rang once. I opened it to find a single envelope on the mat. No one in sight. The handwriting was unfamiliar. Inside, a card. I stayed here 3 weeks. I never told you my name, but I want you to know you gave me the first safe sleep I've had in 2 years. You think you're just rebuilding a house, but what you're building is hope. No signature, just a drawing on the back, a sunflower, blooming from the cracks of a broken floorboard. I held it to my chest and closed my eyes. Outside, the wind moved through the apple tree. The blossoms shook like tiny bells, like a song only I could hear. I walked upstairs, paused in front of my old bedroom. It was empty now, waiting for the next woman who needed it. I smiled. There was always someone who needed it. And now, there was someone here to say, "You belong." I didn't seek revenge. I didn't get apologies tied up with bows. I didn't force anyone to understand. But I found peace. And I left the door open behind me, just wide enough for someone else to find it, too. Because that's what strength is. Not the closing of a door, but the quiet choice to hold it open for someone else.